80's are back in this all-new album from Ben Co. Records. Introducing, like, oh my god, it's totally the 80's. 19 of the baddest hits of the 80's. Take a chill pill to the theme from Minnesota Nice by Armand Hammer. Killer tunes from righteous artists, including Van Heusen, Durante Durante, and Bob's Sneaker.
Against the wind, against the wind, still running.
Veg out to tubular tracks from William Fjord and Farfig Newton. Radical dope music for every bitchin' occasion from artists like The Eurythmics and Joe Cocker Spaniel.
They lift us up where we belong, where the eagles cry on a mountain high.
All these and more on one ultra-thin extended play cassette, not available in any store. Thank God. To order, like, oh my god, it's totally the 80's, please send cash, money order, credit card, prepaid debit card, automobile titles, and property deeds to... I am so not going to say that title again. Send everything you've got to KLAK TV, P.O. Box 1564, Worms, Nebraska 90125. Please allow 6 to 8 months for delivery, largely because 140-minute tapes are kinda hard to come by these days.
Sailing takes me away the way I've always wanted.
And welcome to the Oddity Archive, the show that
Rises like Olympus above the Serengeti.
rises like a limp wrist above the Serengeti. What a stupid line! Or is it Olympus above the Serengeti? Okay, that's just pretentious. Either way, that line has bugged me for years. Actually, that whole song bugs me, but I'm getting off track already. So, believe it or not, I have actually been kind of looking forward to today's episode. Today marks our first ever all 80's edition of Record Ripoffs. So, in honor of the occasion, I got my Don Johnson 2-day beard going on, and I would be wearing a white blazer with the sleeves pushed up, of course, and some pastel-colored socks, but I don't have anything like that, and I can't be bothered to acquire such things. And there I go, going off track again. Anyway, I've got 5 albums to cover here today, and 2 of them are on the most overtly 80's format of them all, the 8-track. And of course, like every time I have to deal with these stupid things, I had to do a little surgery. But this first one had some sort of weird latch system going on, and I wound up having to reach out to the great 8-track guru, my friend Canadian Ben, Classical Gas Emissions Ben, no relation, and he was able to walk me through this one, so I guess some sort of, well, acknowledgement is in order. Or maybe not, because this turned out to be a real turkey. So, with his help, today's first album is Top 10 Rock 1981 Volume 2. Or Top 10 Rock Volume 2 1981. Consistency was not their strong suit here. But regardless of the wording, they left out a pretty crucial word in that title, and that word would be soft, as in soft rock. Because, save for 2 or 3 cuts, we're heading into straight up yacht rock territory with this sucker. Now, one last little point of business before I get started. I got my hands on a pretty nice Pioneer Centrex deck last year, and just as I was starting to make this, it developed some pretty nasty gremlins. It kind of knew what was coming, I guess. So I wound up having to dig up my old Montgomery Wow and Flutter again. And I mean that quite literally. I mean, I tried to give it a good, proper, dignified burial after last year's episode, especially after that Rod Stewart tape. Rod Stewart. And so if it looks a little dirty, now you know why.
Don't wanna mistrust nobody by mistake. I can tell somebody's digging round in my cave. Don't wanna cause nobody no bodily harm, but somebody's been rubbing on my good luck charm. Gonna stand for it, baby. I ain't gonna stand for it, baby. Now.
Woman, I can hardly express my mixed emotion and my thoughtlessness.
Flash on two and don't stop. Shoot, shot, go out to the parking lot and rapture. Be pure, take a tour through the sewer. Don't strain the brain, play the train. You sing in the rain. Don't stop, do punk rock. Just call me angel of the morning, angel. Just touch my cheek before you leave me. Then slowly turn away. Maybe the sunlight will be dim, and it won't matter anyhow. If morning's echoes as we sing, well, it was what I wanted now.
I'm lying alone with my head on the phone, thinking of you till it hurts. I'm all out of love, I'm so lost without you. I know you were right, been leaving for so long. What are you thinking of? What are you thinking of? I'm all out of love, I'm so lost without you. I know you were right, been leaving for so long.
Where do we go from here? Now that all of the children are growing up, I hate people play. You take it or you leave it. Things that they say just ain't right. Games people play in the middle of the night.
We at the Oddity Archive are now officially victims of progress. So this marks our first Record Ripoffs installment to feature no vinyl. So record ripoffs with no records. But having said that, there was this little format that was introduced in 1982 called the compact disc, or CD. And we got 2 of those for today's episode. So anyway, this first CD actually officially dates to 2000, but I'd say about half of the recordings on here were a bit older than that, and at least a couple of them sound like they were period recordings. They're pretty period accurate, so unless they had some analog gear and period synths still hanging around, yeah, I think this is kind of a hodgepodge of a bunch of different sources. But anyway, if you're a die-hard archive thrifting fan, you've already at least seen the cover to this one. And that would be, just generically, hits from the 80s. As performed by the Countdown Singers. I don't know why I feel so bad about that. Not that that name ever means anything. But anyway, the title to this, as simple as it is maybe a slight misnomer. If you want to get really pedantic, one of the songs on here was actually released in late 79, but everything was a hit during the 80s. But having said that, none of the original versions of any of these tunes date to any later than 1984. So I think a more apt title for this one would actually be Hits from the First Half of the 80s.
There's only you in my life.
My first love, your every breath that I take. Oh yes, you will always be my endless love.
You're a mountain on our way, but we climb a step every day. Get up, get up, get up, get up. Wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. Baby, I got sick this morning. See what's storming inside of me. When I get that feeling, I want sexual healing, sexual healing. It's good for me. Oh, don't cry. Was you ever like that? It's gonna take a lot to drag me away from you. There's nothing that 100 men or more could ever do. I've met some rains down in Africa. They lived us up where we belong, where the eagles fly.
A couple of Thanksgivings ago, I did an episode on the archive's all-time greatest earworms. And one of the tunes that I covered on that episode was this kind of Muzak-ish rendition of Berlin's 1986 number one hit, Take My Breath Away. And so at the time, I really had no idea where that recording originated from, but I figured it was either from some stock music library or maybe from Muzak. But an intrepid viewer did a little detective work, and he found a likely candidate for an album that it would be on. And it was this Japanese album from some group called the Movin Dream Orchestra. So he sent me the Discogs link, and there was a decently priced copy on there, and I figured, well, I'll take the gamble and see if it's the right one. Well, sure enough, it's the right one. But as I was making that initial listen and I was just kind of looking at the artwork, I realized that the artist's name does not appear on the cover or on the spine, and it only discreetly appears on the back. And I figured, well, this kind of qualifies for record ripoffs status. I mean, I could totally picture somebody back then, finding this in some record store, picking it up, and taking it home, throwing it in the CD player, and finding that they got a bunch of cheesy instrumental covers of all these movie soundtrack tunes. So, I'm including it here. And this next album is indeed Box Office Blasts, latest movie themes. And they weren't joking with that whole latest movie themes bit. So the CD is from 1987, but the movies, at least, not necessarily the compositions, but the main movies that these are tied to date no further back than 1984. Now, I got one last little point of business for this one before I start. This comes to us by way of Denon, and they're best known for making stereo equipment. Now, I do own a Denon CD player, and it's a pretty decent one. But you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and play this on my usual Sony. Because I'm a bad, bad boy. It made me feel so good. So I made a little allusion to Miami Vice earlier, and that was no accident. So today's one and only cassette offering marks the latest and most recent in our long, proud tradition of not the original soundtracks. So from 1986, we've got Songs from Miami Vice, as performed by Freeze! Because, cop show. But anyway, this thing is kind of an anomaly within the realm of knockoff albums in that this was released on a major label. Granted, it was CBS Special Products, but still. I don't know, is that kind of like riding on the special bus? Anyway, this tape was still sealed when I got it, and of course when I opened it up I got a nice snootful of 1986 goodness, but I also ran into one of those weird little side effects of certain 80s tapes. So, like pretty much every major label tape at the time, this thing is Dolby encoded, and of course I usually just ignore that. But having said that, there was kind of a period, here in the States at least, from 85 to 88, where sometimes they would go a little crazy with the Dolby, especially Dolby B. And this is one of those tapes, and it's actually the worst I've ever encountered. I mean, this thing just throbs without the Dolby. So I had to dig out my one and only proper Dolby deck just to do this segment. So I dug out my TAC V770, and that thing is from 1986, so I guess that makes this truly 100% period appropriate. Granted, it does nothing for the bad engineering or anything, but we can't be too picky, can we?
Cause you belong to the city.
Today's last album brings us full circle back to the 8-track, and it brings us back around to the early 80s. So with that, today's final album is Summer Rock 2, 1980. And this one actually fooled me pretty good at first. So I stuck this in, and with the first couple of songs, I figured I had just put in one of the many record ripoffs candidates that I pick up that simply is not bad enough for this show. So in this case, we had a Spinners cover and an Elton John cover, both of which were surprisingly good. But then a rather unsurprising pattern emerged. So, given the title, we're supposed to have a rock record here, but mostly we're dealing in the gentler end of so-called rock music. But when we do try to go more overtly rock, so in this case, stuff like Bob Seger, Joe Walsh, and Pink Floyd, the worse it gets. But there was one kind of surprising part to all this. And that is that the simpler the tune, the harder they fail. Case in point, Tommy Two Tone's other hit.
Angel, I love you. You know I love you. But what can I say? When you're married, boy, what feels the same way? Angel, say no. Goodbye, it's already done. Angel, say no, no, no. Let me love you tonight. There's a million stars.
I wouldn't call today's last individual song the worst out of any of today's albums, but it just seemed kind of poetic to sit on this one for the ending. So it seems like in the last few years, we've really gone into 80s nostalgia overdrive. And as someone who spends his whole freaking life with old stuff, I'd like to think I've seen more than my share of the stuff that has not held up and we have not carried forward with us. But by the same token, I'd like to think that I understand nostalgia, perhaps a little too well. And so that brings us around to this particular song. And I think this one kind of embodies that whole thing. So, both the original hit and the knockoff. So the tune in question is The Best of Times, originally by Styx. Now, of course, Styx did this whole run of these really inorganic, totally forced concept albums. And in the case of this song, they're ham-fistedly shoehorning in the idea of the Paradise Theater, the album that it was originally on, into an otherwise totally unrelated song. So in short, it's that collision of cheap nostalgia and crass commercialism back in the 80s and today. So, as far as I'm concerned, the whole thing can cause you to lose perspective, and I think that's something we need to kind of keep our eye on, but I don't know, maybe I'm getting a little overly philosophical here. Anyway, that is it for today's archive. Join me next time when a bunch of Styx fanboys go off on me for taking a little shot at their beloved band, and, oh, who am I kidding?
Tonight's the night we'll make history. Rumor